March Madness, spring break, vacation, whichever you prefer. You know it's that time of the year when things start to warm up. Same thing applies here on the Creepy Fox YouTube channel. As we welcome in the new season, we start things off with another edition of Scary Stories. This time, we'll be covering your experiences from and around spring break. Speaking of your experiences, if you have a story you'd like to be featured on a future episode, then make sure to send it in at tcfnarrations@gmail.com. Just make sure that story you're sending hasn't been sent in to another narrator or posted online. That way, we can keep everything fresh and new. So with that said, make sure to sit back and relax as we relive your spooky tales. Number 1. Mysterious Armed Men. When you're a kid, being taught stranger danger is one of the most important and valuable sets of information your brain will ever store in your life. Sometimes, however, you might have a slip-up or two, and this was one of my lacks of judgment that saw myself and my cousin countering one of the most frightening life experiences of our lives. I don't really think I've heard of anyone else experience something like this, but let me know if you have. For context, this was back in 2008 when I was on spring break visiting family in the state of Michoacan in Mexico. If for whatever reason that name sounds familiar, maybe it should. Michoacan, a beautiful state in Mexico with its fauna and flora, has unfortunately been overrun by violence in the recent years. It's quite sad to be honest, but at the time I was visiting, that was unheard of. Anyways, I should mention I'm male, and I was 15 years old when this occurred. Now, it all started when my cousin Carlos, aged 17, and myself ended up going to the beach so that we could ride on our ATVs, as well as go fishing. The stretch of beach we were to drive on went on for miles. It took about an hour and a half just to arrive at the little peninsula at the end. That's where we were aiming to go at. Only reason we were going that far was because another family member had been out there years ago, and he claimed that's where all the big and rare fish were. Anyways, before we even started anything, we stopped at a little store so that we could pick up some bait, as well as some snacks for the drive. I recall the man at the cash register warning us about driving too far, as they had recently dealt with a couple of ATV riders that got stuck out in the middle of nowhere. The only reason they were found was because someone in a boat that had been fishing by the coast managed to see them. So, we thanked him for the knowledge as we exit the little shop, and we prepared for the long trek ahead. Before we knew it, the once busy and lively beach with families and kids playing in the water was silenced by the sounds of our engines as we were on our ATVs heading east alongside the coast, with our sun-kissed skin being met with the warm, silky summer's air. Along the way, we saw plenty of birds flying above, with plenty of patches of coconut trees being littered every few miles. After about an hour, we noticed what looked to be like a series of abandoned huts. Seeing as both of us are very curious, we let go of the gas and soon hit the brakes as our ATVs eventually come to a stop. You guessed it, we wanted to check out the huts, because you know, curiosity. They were fairly uneventful, apart from the graffiti and trash that was everywhere. We did have to be careful, however, as there was a bunch of broken bottles and even a couple of needles. Come to think of it, we were pretty dumb to even attempt walking in those small structures. Anyways, while we were reading some of the graffiti, we ended up being interrupted by the sound of a car engine approaching. That spooked both of us as we used the cover of the structure to take a look outside. Moments later, a truck with 5 men step out with guns. And we aren't talking about little pistols. Oh no, I'm talking full-on ARs. You should have seen the look of absolute fear on our faces as we hear one of them make a remark about our ATVs. From what we were able to gather, this must have been some sort of meeting spot for criminals. As if things couldn't get any worse, they then begin searching the immediate area. We used the cover of a cheap couch to hide, but we ended up being found anyways. I'm actually surprised the man didn't just end us there, but he told us to stand up, put our hands in the air, and then slowly walk out of the hut. We were met moments later with a sudden stare of eyes from the intimidating men. The entire time, their ARs didn't leave our small and non-threatening teenage frames. One of them then asks what we were doing here, to which we nervously respond with just saying we took a break. They then talk amongst themselves before returning their attention back to us, saying no ordinary teenagers have any business being in here. They go on to explain this was a location where they did their so-called business trading, and nobody was allowed to be loitering around unless they had some sort of connection with their group. We apologized non-stop, thinking that at any moment that was going to be it. I still count my lucky stars for who appeared to be the leader, telling us to never return, or next time, his men wouldn't be so generous. I still think since we looked really young for our age, they must have felt bad. They lower the rifles as both Carlos and I jump back on our ATVs, and we leave. That wasn't without one final warning. They ended up firing a couple of rounds into the air, which I think was their way of saying, "You got off lucky." So unfortunately, or should I say, fortunately, we didn't go to that fishing spot we were told of, and instead we drove back home, never to return to that beach again. Edit. As an update, all of these years later, it's been advised that people stay away from that area. It's very dangerous. Not that you have to convince me otherwise. Number 2. My dog warns me of danger. This occurred during spring break of 2014, when I was driving back from visiting my family in Toronto. Since this was the end of my spring break vacation, I was quite sad to be returning to class the following afternoon. Not so much because I despise studying, but because you grow accustomed to not doing anything when you're at home. I'd spent most of the time going backpacking with my dad and 2 older brothers, where we went fishing, and we stayed at my grandfather's cabin. All in all, good times. But because this encounter doesn't involve the wilderness aspect, I will instead be focusing my attention on what I encountered at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The time was approximately 11 p.m. in the evening, and I was starting to get the bad urge to go pee. Luckily, I'd spotted an advertisement for a rest stop in a few kilometers. Where I was at, by the way, was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The last car I'd seen was about 30 minutes ago, and the only thing accompanying me was my Dachshund Allie and the trees beside us. With my bladder screaming at me like my mom used to when I stayed up too late, I breathed a sigh of relief when I finally pulled into the rest area. I will admit though, it was a tad creepy. The place looked abandoned with its windows being boarded up and debris all over the place. I almost considered just doing my business elsewhere, but I couldn't take it anymore. I turned my car off, lowered the window a bit for Allie, grabbed my revolver from my glove compartment, and then run into the stall and release. Now, before I get any messages about leaving Allie in the car, relax. It was a mild and cool evening, and the back windows were open for air to get in. Also, you might be asking yourself, why the revolver? I guess it was because of my paranoia more than anything. I mean, come on, it being close to midnight and being in the middle of nowhere, it's going to cause your nerves to be at an all-time high. By the way, this extra precaution, I believe, ended up saving my life. Anyways, I was in there for no more than 3 minutes when I ended up hearing Allie bark like crazy. I recognized the type of bark as the one she does when a stranger approaches her. I did find it odd that I hadn't heard any cars approach or car doors closing, which was why I stood in the stall for another minute or two, hoping Allie would relax. She didn't, so I assumed she was just barking at a wild animal. As I finished washing my hands, however, I ended up hearing something absolutely terrifying. I still remember those chilling words to this day, just because of how creepy I found them to be.
Are you ready? Let's get her. Shh, not yet. Be quiet. She's going to hear us.
Just so you know, I heard this in between Allie's distant barking, and the voices were coming from outside the restroom. Whoever was out there wasn't exactly trying to keep their cover a mystery. I mean, maybe they were, but they weren't doing a great job at it. I grabbed the revolver from my purse, and I waited for what was looking to be an ambush. 3 or so minutes go by, and I guess the people that were waiting for me must have gotten fed up, and they walk into the restroom. There are 2 homeless-looking guys walking over to me with large knives and creepy smiles.
Don't you dare run or scream, or you're dead. You got it?
These 2 had the nerve to come at me with knives? How's that saying go about not bringing a knife to a gunfight? Well, I wasn't about to let these 2 strangers have their way, so I take out the revolver, and I watch as these 2 start to panic.
Come on, it was just a joke. We do this with everyone that comes to the rest stop. Put the revolver down.
Right, like that was going to happen. Before I had a chance to shoot, the 2 booked it out of the restroom, and I followed them as they run into the nearby forest, never for me to see them again. The rest of the trip back home was uneventful, as I got home shortly before 3 a.m., before finally crashing in my bed with Allie beside me. All of these years later, I still wonder what those 2 really had planned. I'm just thankful for Allie giving me a warning of the stranger's presence. Also, if I wasn't armed, these 2 most likely would have accomplished what it was they were after. Tell me, what would you have done in that situation? Hey there, I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Before we continue, let's take this opportunity to thank my channel members, Robbie, Bo, Kim, and Spunky the Nutcase. If you'd like to help support what I do here, along with getting early access to new videos, then check out the channel memberships option. It's right next to where it says subscribe. Anyways, let's continue. Number 3. A true camping nightmare. It was April during spring break, and I was 15 at the time. Myself and 2 cousins, who were aged 14 and 18 respectively, ended up going to my uncle's cabin so that we could spend time camping. This takes place in North Dakota, by the way. For a bit of context, the cabin was surrounded by woods on all sides. To the east was a dirt road that leads you to a lake that's next to a cave, and about 5 miles to the south was a trailer park. Anyways, on one of our nights there, we ended up deciding on camping by the lake and using the small cave as our shelter. That afternoon, we were able to catch a couple of fish from the lake and then prepared it over the campfire. This was along with the hot dogs and s'mores we had brought in our backpacks. Fast forward a little while after that, and we decided to go for a quick walk around the lake so that we could walk off the feast we had just consumed. The lake itself is about a mile in length, and with the impending darkness of the night, it was very hard to see at longer distances, unless of course you have a flashlight. We had 3, which seemed to be no issue as we began making our way around the lake. It wasn't until we were returning we ended up noticing movement by our campfire. We turned our flashlights off as not to be spotted and focused on 2 tall figures appearing to be going through our things. We weren't about to allow strangers to steal our stuff, so we quicken our pace and we begin to approach them. However, what happens only moments later sends us into an absolute frenzy. We hear 2 loud bangs that echo through the woods, followed by laughter. It seemed these 2 strangers were armed, and our immediate concern was getting the heck out of there. Unfortunately for us, and our anger to get over to these guys, we had gotten a little too close for comfort. This meant as we started to make our getaway, one of my cousins ended up tripping and causing a huge ruckus when he lands on a bunch of tree branches and leaves. We shushed my cousin, but it wasn't enough as the 2 heard our non-sneaky-like movement, then began firing shots in our general direction. I can still remember hearing the sound of metal hitting trees as we run into the wilderness, using said trees as our cover. Needless to say, we ended up running to my cousin's truck and driving out of there. When we got into town, we ended up going to the police station, and they got into contact with the local park rangers. We never did find out whether or not they were caught, but we think about this. Perhaps they must have been from that nearby trailer park, and they were high off their minds, or maybe they really were thinking of taking us out. It's not known what their intentions truly were, since we didn't stick around to find out. But could you really blame us, though? Number 4. Midnight Stroll Creep. Back around 2014, I went to Jamaica for spring break with 2 other friends. We will call them Chloe and Michelle. We ended up staying at a fairly decent hotel that was right along the beach. The hotel itself featured swimming pools, spas, all-you-can-eat buffets, and some of the most comfortable beds you'll ever sleep in. Our trip would be for 1 week, which we thankfully decided to stay in one big room so that we could split up the cost. Most of our time was spent hanging out at the swimming pool, having drinks and just people watching. There were a couple of days where the hotel threw parties, and we ended up going to those too. Now, even though things might seem like they're fairly innocent, that would take a dramatic turn one evening. It was around midnight, and I was having trouble sleeping. You see, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to join my friends on this vacation was because I had recently broken up with my then girlfriend of 3 years. I was devastated when I found out she cheated on me, which is why some of those nights had me staying up. This evening was no different, as I got up from bed and I looked at my phone. I recall stepping into the shower, frustrated with these thoughts, and I told myself it would be better to go outside and get some fresh air. So once I was dressed, I exited our room and I made my way to the elevator. That's where I was met with one of the hotel staff that told me about the free hot chocolate in the front lobby. I thanked her for the info, and I make my way to get some. That seemed to calm my nerves a bit. Looking back, I wish I would have just stayed at the hotel. But instead, I was keeping true to my word and going outside for air. It was pretty empty, apart from a few hotel staff cleaning the pools and mopping the floors. I recall hearing the low sound of tropical music playing over their speakers, being disguised with the plants and other beautiful flowers. Anyways, I made my way off the property and head down a set of stairs that lands me on the beach. The warm sand welcomed my feet with its embrace, as each step felt like a massage. The beach was empty, as expected at that hour, which was why I ended up walking for a bit. Eventually, I plastered my bum on the sand, and I sat by the water, letting the ocean soothe my pains. I must have been so focused on my music and the therapeutic sounds, because before I knew it, it was closing in on 2 a.m. Now, starting to get heavy eyes and yawns that accompanied it, I start to make my way back. However, out from behind some nearby trees stepped out a man who appeared to be a local. He called out to me with his Jamaican accent, and I stopped in place wondering what he wanted. Yes, I know that was a bad idea, but I was at such peace my fight or flight wasn't exactly working properly.
What's a pretty girl like you doing out here at this time of night? You know, it's pretty dangerous to be alone.
I thanked him for his concerns and told him there was no worries as I was heading back to the hotel. He then offered to walk me back, which I responded with a no thank you. He didn't take that lightly, as he started to keep up pace with me and ask even more questions.
How old are you? And how long are you staying in town for?
But perhaps the question that really got to me was when he offered to take me back to his place so that he could, and I quote, show me a good time. Your guess is as good as mine to what he was meaning with that. Not that it wasn't obvious. That really angered me, which was why I ended up slapping him in the face. Huge mistake. The look he had went from slightly annoyed with my hard-to-get attitude to, you're dead for doing that. The man takes out a knife from his pocket and then starts chasing me. We're still on the beach, mind you, which is why it was really difficult to run on the sand. Luckily, I'd played beach volleyball during high school, which was why I had such great conditioning. He, however, seemed to be the complete opposite, as he had a hard time catching up with me. After a brief chase, I make my way up those set of steps from earlier, where luckily, I managed to see a couple of security guards talking to each other. Poor guys, I ended up startling them from what must have been such an interesting conversation, because I swear they must have jumped at least a few inches out of their shoes. Nonetheless, I tried to catch my breath as they began asking me what was wrong. I pointed to the steps, and they head over to look. I do too, and we ended up seeing that man that was chasing me running back the way he came from. After about 20 seconds, I managed to relay the message of dude with knife chasing me, and they took me a little more serious. They told me this wasn't the first time something like this happened. I was shocked, but even more so with their lack of doing anything. I would have thought they would have gone running after him, but that was just me having wishful thinking to get revenge on the dude causing me a full-on panic attack. Either way, the security guards called police, and then they walked me back to my room, where I woke up my friends. They had slept through the entire ordeal, which was why they found it incredibly hard to believe I just had the scare of a lifetime. A couple of nights later, I ended up seeing those same security guards and asking them if there were any updates. They told me the police had captured and arrested the man after he was connected with a series of robberies. Well, it was nice to know that justice was served. Number 5. The Not-So-Abandoned Home. Let's rewind to spring of 2017. It was a time when I'd gotten into urban exploration. I'd explored plenty of buildings in the surrounding counties. To give you a list of what I explored up to that point, it included a couple of abandoned hospitals, abandoned malls, and an abandoned toy factory. I got plenty of pictures in case anyone's interested in seeing them, but I want to focus instead on this one time during spring break where I went to explore a place that had me literally running for my life. Now, on my previous urban exploration adventures, I had brought my friends with me. This time, however, I was on my own. Reason being was because I actually had just been returning from visiting my parents in California. On the way back home to Vegas, I decided to take a detour that would take me into the desert. Most people might want to avoid spending extra gas, but there was a reasoning to my madness. You see, there was this really neat spot that featured amazing rock formations that lots of people like to stop and take pictures at. I wanted to do the same, which was why I made the pit stop, and I got plenty of photos for my Instagram. Once I left, it only took about 20 minutes to notice a home that was off the highway that looked to be abandoned. The urban explorer in me grew interested as I pondered whether or not it was a good idea to go see it with my own eyes. Well, it wasn't a surprise that I take the next exit and then drive down this unmarked dirt road for about half a mile. I arrive and I'm able to notice a couple of things. The home was a lot larger than I had originally anticipated, as it was 2 stories. I blamed this on the distance I was at when I spotted it. Second, all the windows were boarded up, and there was graffiti sprayed all over the front walls. One of the messages read, "Do not trespass." You can already guess where this might be going. I ignored the eerie message, grabbed my survival knife and flashlight, put on my heavy-duty boots and gloves, then start to approach the home. Now, at the angle I approached the home, I was unable to see if there were any persons or vehicles in the back. This was a miscalculation on my behalf, as my number 1 rule is to survey the locations I'm exploring, just to ensure it is indeed abandoned. I blame my naiveness, if that's even a word, on the setting sun and my time limit. Anyways, I step over the trash and debris on the front porch, and I enter the home. Crickets. No, for real. I heard crickets. But apart from my chirping little friends, I saw a lot more graffiti sprayed on what I assumed used to be the living room. There was an old couch and a wooden rocking chair that sat next to the window, with spider web surrounding its wooden frame. There's also a vintage rug that had a bunch of stripes on it. I thought it was neat, as I then continue over to what looked to be like a kitchen. I say it looked to be like one, because I saw a refrigerator and an oven. They weren't in working condition as I checked inside both. But perhaps one of the most eerie things I saw in this kitchen was the pentagram sprayed on the ground with a bunch of knives surrounding it. That gave me the chills, but it would be the least of my concerns. Out of nowhere, I began to hear footsteps coming from the second story. I remember going from full-on confidence to absolute fear, as the noise sounded frantic. I didn't want to stick around to find out who or what was in here, which is why I began making my way to the front door. However, I am suddenly stopped by a loud and angry deep voice.
"What are you doing in here? This is our property. Get out."
I turn toward the top of the staircase, and my flashlight shines on two men. One had a shotgun, the other had a knife. I apologized, saying I thought the place was abandoned. This didn't seem to calm their anger. The one with the shotgun raises his aim up toward me, and I basically Superman dive out of the front door as he fires a blast so loud it was ringing in my ears for the next few minutes. I booked it, dropping my flashlight and knife in the process, and then jump into my vehicle. As I start to make my way out of there, I did notice in the rearview mirror a truck drive out from behind the home. Remember how I told you I never bothered to check back there? Well, my recklessness had me dealing with me being chased for the next half mile until I got onto the highway. They didn't follow me, which was a good thing, but just their presence alone managed to give me such a scare, I decided never to explore abandoned locations again. So, that was the time I spent my spring break thinking it would be a smart idea to visit an abandoned-looking home in the desert. Next time, I think I'll stick to watching movies. Number 6. Spring Break Nightmare at the Dormitories. Ah, yes, spring break. It's crazy, it's already here. Seriously, how is it that so many of you get your break at the beginning of March? Here I thought spring break happened in April. At least, that's how it was growing up for me. But apart from these inconsistencies, I'm here to talk about a spring break where I ended up staying at the dorms. This was back in 2011, by the way, and I was a sophomore in college. Now I shared a living space with 3 other girls. Each one, however, ended up going back home to visit their families. Actually, that explained most of the dormitories. I want to estimate about 85% of the students ended up going home or on vacation. I actually love this because the surrounding downtown was practically a ghost town. This meant all the bars, restaurants, and even the mall I frequented featured less wait times and more of what you were looking for. If you're wondering why I stayed, it's because I had a part-time job working at a pizza parlor. Though I was offered time off, I really needed the money to pay for school. Anyways, this ended up occurring after one of my night shifts. Tired and smelling like cheese and garlic, I went into the back locker room to grab my backpack, ready to head home to my dorm and step into the shower. Before heading out of the door, however, my manager asked if I wanted a free pizza to take home for my hard work. Of course I was going to say yes, so they quickly baked me a cheese pizza, and I finally started to make my way back at around 11:30 p.m. Little did I know having my hands full was going to cause me quite the misfortune. Now, getting to campus from the pizza parlor was about a 10-minute walk through downtown San Jose, California. I don't exactly have too many worries, as there was and still are plenty of street lamps, and just enough foot traffic to make you feel comfortable. However, at a stoplight, I ended up being approached by a homeless man who was asking for money. I told him I had none, and I thought he was going to leave. Instead, he stands next to me, and he begins eyeballing my frame. He wasn't just standing next to me in the normal sense. Dude was literally pushing up against my shoulders. So I backed away and I told him to knock it off, and this seemed to get across to him. The light eventually turns green moments later, and I begin to quicken my pace. I never really thought about looking back. until I noticed the audible sound of footsteps keeping pace with me. Sure enough, the same man was following me, and I began to get a bit worried. "Dude, what do you want? I already told you I don't have any money." What he said next, along with this sudden change in demeanor, gave me nightmares for the next week.
Forget the money. I'll take you instead.
Dude pulls out a knife, and I start to run. And I mean, I'm sprinting, looking like I just saw a ghost. All the while I'm holding onto my pizza box. Seriously, no one comes in between our amazing pizza. By this point, I just entered campus property. I could see the dormitories in the distance. Was just hoping being at the university would cause him to give up the chase. But the guy was determined. He was still running toward me. So I began to think about a problem I hadn't thought about since I first encountered this creep. I need my key card to enter the dorm, as it was the only way you were allowed access into the building. This stops any normal Joe from going in there. Sadly for me, my key card was in my backpack, which meant I would have to toss the pizza. Thank goodness that as I considered my options, I saw a couple of students smoking just outside of the dorms. I screamed and yelled, which caught the attention of these two guys. Funny enough, I actually recognized them as being one of my roommate's friends. They didn't really need an explanation for why I was screaming and being chased by some maniac. One of them opens the front door and then points for me to run in. Finally, after this originally started, we enter into the front lobby and we slam the door on Mr. Creepy Guy. He just stood there, staring at the three of us in defeat, before just walking off into the darkness. We ended up calling campus police, and we gave them a description. Thank goodness that less than 20 minutes later, they stopped and questioned somebody who matched the details we gave. There was a match, and since then, I have never seen him again. By the way, the pizza was cold by the time I got to enjoy it, so thanks a lot, weirdo. Number 7. Vacation in Mexico gone wrong. This happened during spring break of 2014, when my family helped me buy plane tickets and make a hotel reservation in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. For context, I'm male, and I was 22 years old. What I was expecting was fun in the sun, spending time at the pools, and going out partying in the evening. What I wasn't expecting, however, was what I'm emailing the creepy fox about. Being young and naive, spring break in Puerto Vallarta saw me attending a bunch of parties that were filled with many other spring breakers from the States. I ended up meeting and making a bunch of new friends, some who happened to be at the same hotel I was staying at. One friend I met in Puerto Vallarta named Emily, who I am still friends with today, invited me to go with a group of friends to a famous restaurant/bar that featured some of the best Mexican food in the area. She didn't disappoint. They had some of the best enchiladas I'd ever consumed. I just wish I had the courage to return. Anyways, I stayed with them for a couple of hours to approximately midnight. By this point, Emily and her group of friends were ready to go to another bar, but I was absolutely exhausted. So, after excusing myself, I head outside to get a taxi. Unfortunately, I hadn't realized that I didn't have the necessary funds to make it back to the resort. That would mean I'd have to walk. In case you're wondering why I didn't ask my new friend Emily for some cash, it's because Emily and her group of friends had already gotten into a taxi and left. Slightly frustrating, but I thought, how bad could the walk be? There wasn't really any way for me to get lost since I was able to see the resort in the distance. I estimated it would take me about 20 minutes to walk over there. Thus, I began walking, using the lighted streets and familiar landmarks to guide my way. At one point, I got to a street whose lights were very dim. There was also less foot traffic from the streets I was on earlier. This made me a bit anxious, since again I'm in a different country and I barely spoke the native language. Still, Bad things only happen in the movies, right? What's the worst that could happen? Well, as I waited across the street, I began to hear footsteps approaching me from behind. I got the chills, but then I thought perhaps it was just another person walking at night. I pushed on the crossing button even faster, being interrupted by something being pressed against my back. I didn't understand much of what was said, apart from dinero and pistola. I was at least knowledgeable with those words. Well, to save you too many details, I was essentially being robbed. I think the man must have noticed I wasn't from the area, which was why he began speaking in broken English. Due to his demands, I ended up handing over my cell phone and my wallet. My wallet had the equivalent of about $10. No credit or debit card, by the way, since I left those back at the hotel room. The man then runs back into an alleyway, never to be seen again. To think, all of this happened in about 30 seconds. Well, I was shaken to the core as I run back to the hotel and notify police using the hotel's lobby phone. The police were pretty much of no help since I couldn't get any details of the man due to the mask he wore. Super scary. I'm just so thankful I didn't have my actual ID on me. I feel that it could have been used by him or others to make false ID cards. By the way, for those wondering how I got into the bar, I ended up using my passport, which thankfully he didn't ask for, nor steal. As for my cell phone, it did have a passcode on it, which meant they would have to figure it out in order to get its information. It's been almost 6 years and I haven't had any strange phone calls or visits by mysterious strangers, so it's safe to say they never cracked the code. Number 8. Creepy truck driver encounter. My best friend Lacey and I, both in our early 20s, were on a road trip for spring break. We were driving from Colorado to Las Vegas so that we could celebrate Lacey's birthday. A few hours into the drive, we started to get a bit hungry. Thus, we ended up stopping at a rest area in the middle of the desert that featured a McDonald's, a convenience store, and a gas station. We entered the McDonald's and ordered some chicken nuggets and french fries. Then we sat at a table for about 20 minutes, watching the TV and talking about how excited we were to arrive in Vegas. After we were done, Lacey had to go use the restroom, so she excuses herself, and I'm left alone just looking over my phone. A minute or two later, I noticed something in my peripheral vision, which was also accompanied with a nasty smell, the one you get when you haven't showered in days. Well, it turned out there was a 40-something-year-old male wearing dirty large overalls, plaid red t-shirt, and a baseball cap. Best way I could describe him was your typical truck driver. He easily looked to weigh between 280 to 300 pounds and was at least 6'5".
Excuse me, young lady, but are you traveling on your own?
No, I'm with a friend. She's in the restroom right now.
Oh, is she? Well, how old are you two?
I was starting to get annoyed with this sudden questioning, so I just made some information up, hoping he would get the idea and just leave. Dude takes a seat at my table and begins asking even more questions.
Where are you traveling to? Maybe I can take you two back to my truck, and I can show you around town.
Really? What was he going to show us when all there was desert? Unless you had some cool mansion with a swimming pool and entertainment center, we might be talking. I'm kidding, by the way. I made it perfectly clear I wasn't interested in hanging out with him, even though he kept insisting he just liked making new friends along his travels. This would have been okay if it wasn't for the constant excuses he made to try and get closer. At one point, he complimented how beautiful my hair was, and he tried to grab it. I remember being fed up and shouting as loud as I could, "Don't you dare put your hands on me!" Suddenly, everybody in the McDonald's looked over, and he started to get nervous. The dude makes the expression of, "We were just playing," before he just walked outside. Seriously, Lacey, thanks for leaving me out here. About 30 seconds later, Lacey finally walks out of the restroom, and I tell her, let's just leave. She was confused to my sudden anger, as I told her I would explain once we were back on the road. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be that easy. The truck driver was waiting for me.
Hey, sorry about that. I want to apologize. I've got some goodies in the back of my truck. Maybe I can make it up to you.
Talk about the dumbest move in the book, as if we were going to really follow him. I tell Lacey to keep up pace with me, and we make our way to her car. The man wasn't giving up. He follows us over to Lacey's vehicle. Then he begins pounding on the front hood, demanding we get out. Now do you understand, Lacey? This dude's been trying to get me to go with him ever since you were in the restroom. I'm pretty sure she didn't need the explanation. She puts the key into the ignition, and we start to back up. The man, however, quickly runs to the back of the car and tries to block our exit. Lacey didn't care. She ended up driving over his foot. Ouch. Which we then hear him curse and yell at us for doing so. We pretty much got out of there with no further altercations, and we made it to Vegas late in the evening. Before we get to the final story, I just wanted to go ahead and give you all a quick reminder. If you're ever looking for extra content, whether it be art, previews, or sneak peeks, then make sure to follow me over on my Instagram @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thank you. I'll see you there. But for now, let's get on to our final entry. Number 9. Let Me In. I'm not really sure how I want to start this off, so I'll just give you a bit of background. This occurred during spring break in the early 2000s, and I was babysitting my younger sister. I was about 15 or 16, and she was, I'd say, 7 or 8. I don't remember the exact year, but I do remember it happening during high school. Also, I'll go ahead and mention that this was during a time when my mom was working long hours. Sadly, our father had passed not too long before this happened, which meant my mom had to pick up a second job. I pretty much took over taking care of my sister, making sure she got dressed, she ate, went to school, etc. Anyways, I recall myself and my sister being in our living room watching movies when we started to hear somebody knocking at our front door. Just so you get a bit of understanding, we live in a pretty quiet middle American town where it's very unheard of to be getting people showing up to your house past 9 p.m., which was more or less the current time. It was weird, but we thought it might have been one of the neighbors leaving some apples. You see, the next door neighbor had a huge apple tree, and she would occasionally give some to our family. There had even been times where we weren't home and she would leave some on the front porch in a little basket. But since that didn't appear to be the case, the knocking ended up coming to a halt, and we soon returned to our movie. No less than 3 minutes later, both my sister and I could hear the door handle in the kitchen being violently shaken. This startled the two of us, and me being the brave older sister I was, go to check it out. I got the chills when I see a man dressed in all black clothing through the window, trying to make his way into our house.
Can you let me in? I'm with the power company. I need to check your electricity.
Okay, let's get one thing straight. If he really was with a power company, which was very doubtful, where was his uniform? Last I checked, you aren't representing a company in street clothing. Also, I'm pretty sure the electric meter is outside. And not only that, but by the way he spoke, it sounded as if he was drunk. All of these details were why I reminded him I wasn't going to unlock the door. This caused a change in his behavior, from calm and collected to one of anger.
Let me into your house. I'm not going to tell you again.
By now, my sister is crying, and I'm trying my best to stay as calm as I could. I tell my sister to go to her room and lock the door, but she didn't want to be by herself. Not that I could really blame her. She stays by my side as I grab a kitchen knife. Then I use the phone to call police. Hello? I need somebody here right away. There's a man outside. He's trying to break into our home. While explaining to the operator our current situation, I saw him putting something into the keyhole. I later found out from the scratches that were left, it was a knife. He was trying to pry his way in. Not that I'm even sure it's possible to do that with a knife. Whatever the case was, he seemed to have given up by cursing a bunch of different phrases I won't repeat here, and then he starts to stumble away. Thankfully, the operator had relayed enough information to the officers so that they could locate him. We get confirmation when the police ask us to identify the man in the back of their vehicle, and there was a perfect match. Thus, he was taken away. My mom ended up calling the police station the following afternoon, and we did find out he was indeed intoxicated, so that explained everything.